So, ladies and gentlemen, today on Sports File, we're going to take a very interesting look at possibly a borderline New Brunswick, NHL Hall of Famer to many, and a lot of people might be shocked by this, but he's not in the NHL Hall of Fame, despite his many Stanley Cups, his great point totals, his international success, and his overall impact on the league. Now, we're going to talk about Peter Little M. Mahovlich, the younger brother of superstar Frank Mahovlich. Peter Mahovlich's style of play and his character and his, application of his skill stood out for us in the 1960s and 70s and into the early 80s because Peter seemed to be a very jovial guy in most occasions. He overachieved in a lot of ways, and what he really stood out because at the time he was one of the biggest NHLers of his era at 6'5", 210 pounds, a big drink of water. Now, he came in the NHL a very, very highly regarded prospect. He was drafted second overall by the Detroit Red Wings. And the Red Wings at the time had a lot of young prospects in their system, including Paul Henderson, and their connection would be more in play when they both played with Team Canada down the road. Now, in a 3-year career with the Hamilton Red Wings, he averaged almost a goal a point a game pace. First season, 47 points and 220 goals in 54 games. Second year, again, another 20 goals in 55 games. In his third year, he was 36 points, including 14 goals in 46 games. And he also had a small tenure with Detroit. But for some reason in Detroit, and a lot of people are still confused why he never became a star in Detroit, but over 4 seasons he was basically, he had spurts of excellence, but most times he didn't have the point production that a player would need to stay in the NHL. Now here's what happened after a couple of seasons with Fort Worth Wings in the CHL or the CPHL. He eventually was traded to the Montreal Canadiens in the 1969-70 season. For all people, Gary Monahan, who was the number 1 draft pick, the first ever number 1 draft pick ever in NHL history. Now, his first season with Montreal had, again, that inkling of success. He had 21 goals and 40 points with the Montreal Voyageurs. With Montreal, he had 17 points, including 9 goals in 36 games. That year, Montreal didn't make the playoffs, but when Peter and Frank were put together and he played on the same team in Detroit for a while, when Peter and Frank were in Montreal, especially the 71 playoffs, Frank and Peter really stood out as leaders on the team. In 1970-71, he had his big breakout year with 35 goals and 61 points, including 10 goals in the NHL Stanley Cup playoff run for Montreal. He was still picking up a lot of penalty minutes, but when he was on the ice, he was a presence. Now, 72, 73, 74, he continued to pack up the points and goals and assists but in the 74-75 seasons, he really had a big level. He was basically being considered for MVP honors in the 1975 season with a big total of 35 goals and 82 assists and 117 points in 80 games. Now, that year, his penalty minutes started to reduce. He was getting more and more of a factor of being a team leader. And by the 76 season, with Montreal's last dynasty playoff run, he had 105 points on a loaded team in 76, including the insurance goal in game 4 against the Flyers. Now, by the time Montreal was rebuilding, he was traded out of town for Pierre LaRouche, and from then on, his career, although he had great success in Pittsburgh and the fans loved him like they loved in Montreal, he kind of slowly faded away but never hit the other levels he was supposed to. Now, here where the problem I have with people not considering for the Hockey Hall of Fame. On the Team Canada level, he played a big factor in the 1972 Summit Series victory against the Russians. He scored that big goal on the breakaway in Game 2 and changed the game for the better and allowed Team Canada to get a little bit of confidence going in the rest of the games of the series. He was a factor in all aspects of all 8 games, especially in Russia. He basically was the player, the extra player that Canada needed in those Russian games to basically keep his cool, because he was never a dirty player, but he would show aggressivity to protect his fellow forwards, fellow defensemen. Now, in 1975, New Year's Eve, the famous tie against the Red Army team, where technically that was the unofficial one-game World Championship of hockey, where Montreal outplayed the Russians, and everybody remembers of my age, Mahovlich apologizing to Howie Meeker at the end of the game, saying he should have bet the Russians. He was so geared for international competition that game that night. Montreal hit a level that really no other NHL team had hit up until that time. This was before Gretzky. They were bringing back the strength of the NHL. And a few months later, at the 1976 Canada Cup, he was part of what some people consider one of the best Team Canada squads of all time, led by Bobby Orr and Potvin, Orr, Sittler, Lafleur, Schutt. He literally stood out in that series as well. Now, his post-professional hockey career, he's had great success. He was a head coach for the Toledo Gold Diggers for a while, the IHL's Colorado Rangers as co-coach, the Denver Rangers and the Fort Worth Fire, and as well as the great AHL team, the Cape Breton Oilers. Now, Mahovlich was a scout for the Oilers from 95 to 97 before joining the Tampa Bay Lightning and then the Trashers in a similar position. And he's done a lot of pro scouting for the Panthers. Now, if anybody's met Peter Mahovlich, first thing is going to stand out, he's a people person, literally and figuratively. Maybe that's why he jumped to boards in '72 to save Al Nicholson in Game 8 from being carted off by the Russians wherever Gulag Archipelago they would have been sent. But in the book The Game, it's a very complex look that Dryden gives at him, and I'm just going to touch upon it a little bit. I guess there was some kind of emotional battle, or I don't know, cultural battle between him and Mario Tremblay. Did that lead him being traded out of Montreal? It's hard to tell because, I wasn't a sports journalist at the time. It was just basically rumor. But Mahovlich was such a presence. At times, he could hog the puck a little bit too much. At times, not say he was a selfish player, but he needed to have more of a teamwork. But imagine this: only Lemaire and Lafleur could really keep up with Peter Mahovlich on the fast break. He was a very deceptive skater. Although later on, Steve Schutt took his place in the place on the line, as we say. It was Mahovlich was such so many killer points, so many key points in playoff games and regular season games. Imagine you win 60 games like the 1977 season. You need a player like Peter Mahovlich, and he was like his brother Frank, but Frank had more what he called self-hate issues. Frank had mental issues that are still being determined. I know you would call them, emotional ups and downs, whatever. I'm not going to use the B word because that's I'm not a psychiatrist. But Peter seemed to be more of a happy-go-lucky type guy, and but it's a very complex thought that hockey fans of my generation would have. Is Peter Mahovlich the best Montreal Canadiens from that era to not be in the Hall of Fame? Of course. Now his points totals, stand up. I mean, 884 games, 288 goals, 485 assists, and 773 points total. Now, if the four rings count, and the fact is the impact he had on the Montreal, the Red Wings, the Penguins, international hockey, he should be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, in my opinion. Because without him, I don't think Montreal would have won at least one or two of those cups, because he was, first, second line all the time, good in the power play, good on the defense, rarely made a bad pass. He was basically there to be, the player everybody would underestimate, and he basically got the points that were needed. Now, he was like the number 3 in Montreal for years. He was Team Canada's heart and soul in a lot of ways. In 72, even 75, and 76. So if anybody wants to get something done for the next year, Peter Mahovlich, people should be motivating the NHL Hall of Fame to put Peter in. Because I can imagine what the speech would be, the stories we can tell. You look at Dennis Hull, you look at Bobby Hull, and you look at Mahovlich, Frank, and Peter. That's the big connection. Now, does Dennis Hull deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? That's a matter of argument. But with Peter Mahovlich, the stats are there, the championships are there, the international play is there. He should not be discounted. Now, I always tell people to go on YouTube and different locations to find something about Montreal Canadiens, what do you call the alumni or the big veterans. But just go and see that 1975 game against Red Army. Look at game 2 and game 8 against the Russians in 72. And Peter's always doing something, either on defense or on offense. But he never took the level in 72 that other players took. He never went to his head because it went to Frank's head. But Peter was always, let's just do it. And let's party afterwards. Let's do it, let's party. That sums it up. So again, on this floody Saturday in New Brunswick and in Quebec, just a shout out to my family in Matapedia, my family in North Shore, in this region, St. John. Just be careful. Watch the reports. Watch the water levels. Be very, very careful. It just takes one bad turn or one pothole to make us stuck. So anyway, as Peter Mahovlich might say, we're here for a short time, so have a good time. The sun don't shine every day. Have a good one. Bye.